Whew, busy, busy, busy. All right, so at the end of this video, you can see that we created this beautiful tumbler to perfection, and I've already uploaded this video, so you're seeing this in the end times of this video. So in this next linked video will be us creating a 3D topper for this beautiful tumbler. Now this customer specifically asked for a clay topper, so we're going to sculpt that out of Sculpey Original, and I'm going to bake it separate, and we're going to mail it to the customer all in one item. So I'm super excited. Now if you have not seen this project already, or if you're just kind of tag teaming into the end of the video or the beginnings of the next video, before we start the 3D topper, you can see here that we did a hydro dip on this beautiful 30-ounce skinny. We also did a beautiful swirl at the very bottom here, and I'll kind of do a side clip there, and I also applied their logo, Black Rock Dog Training, to the front of that. It's very subtle, very nice, but it's noticeable when you're looking at the tumbler. Now I do have a little bit of cleanup work as far as getting some paint out of the rim and things like that, so it's not fully done, but for the most part all the artisticness on this tumbler is completely finished, and we're going to get into the actual sculpting of the topper. So I hope you guys enjoy this video of us actually creating this portion of the tumbler, and we're going to immediately roll into us sculpting and painting the topper, which will be a singular video. So sit back and enjoy, and I will see you guys whether it's in this painting video or if it's in the topper video. Let's get to it. I am so glad you're able to join me in the studio for another awesome crafting video. Now just remember, we're using this 30-ounce skinny tumbler that we had already done a hydro dip on in the previous video. So if you want to check that out, make sure you stay tuned to the very end, and I'll link that in the info cards. And here we're going to be using a standard just acrylic lid for this. This is the standard lid that comes with the Hogg brand tumblers that I order from. Normally my 30-ounce, or actually all my tumblers, including 30 ounces, come from stainlesssteeldepot.com. So we're just going to be kind of creating like a template here. I want to make sure that that lid is functional even with the topper on there. So what we need to do is we need to build up just a little bit of a barrier so that that sliding portion of that acrylic lid is able to function, whether she wants it to have it closed or have it open. So we're going to start off by just applying just a little bit of saran wrap here. Now I want to try to make sure that this is pretty smooth in general. So what we'll do here is this is just a transition between the air gap of the lid sliding, and then we're going to start the actual sculpture of the topper on top of this. So right now we're going to create that clay buffer. What better use to actually make this little buffer here than the clay that we're working with? This is Sculpey Original oven baked clay, and I'm just going to go ahead and generally just kind of sculpt this in here, and I'm just going to kind of feather the edges a little bit, and we're going to create a nice little air pocket, or what will be an air pocket when we bake this. It'll make sense a little bit later on in the process, but just be aware that this is just going to be kind of a void that we're filling in, and it's going to keep that lid topper slider from interfering with the actual clay topper we're creating. I'm going to apply a nice layer of plastic wrap here. Now, I actually cut this out of a Ziploc plastic baggie, and my goal with this is to make sure that there's no wrinkles, because this is going to be the forward-facing portion of clay that's visible on the bottom of the topper, and I just really wasn't able to achieve that without the wrinkles. I don't want wrinkles in this if I can avoid it. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to kind of stretch this out over this layer of clay here, and I'm going to try to make sure that's as tight as possible. The less wrinkles, the better, and it's just going to give us a very professional grade quality smoothness when it's all said and done. We can go ahead and layer this on here, and then we will go ahead and begin building up our layers for our clay topper. Pushing down the outside edges of that, trying to keep as much air out of there as possible. And I do go ahead and lay this plastic wrap on top of this anyways. It's a little bit thicker of a plastic wrap, and it's going to create just a little bit additional smoothness as we start to apply those clay layers here in just a moment. Now, when I apply this first layer of clay, the first thing that you're going to notice is that it's going to be a single layer of clay. I rolled this out with a lasagna press, and I'm being very detailed in this because I want that to be a seamless piece of clay. I don't want to have to like blend a lot of excess pieces of clay together and create like a Frankenstein like skin effect on the bottom of that topper. I want it to be extremely smooth, or at least as smooth as possible. That way it doesn't have a bunch of ridges and things that I have to fix later on in the epoxy process or the painting process. We want it to be as high grade as possible. After all, a customer is paying for something, you want to make sure they get the best piece of art from the studio as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of layer this in here. After you give the original layer of clay, you can kind of build it up in little sections here and there. And the first part of this is just to literally build up just a base. The base is what we need to apply all of the other pieces of this sculpture to. And without the clay blocking in, it's just not going to work out for us here. So we'll go ahead and build this up here, kind of smooth it out a little bit, make sure it's a nice even shape. And then we'll go ahead and trim these excess areas around the outside edges with an X-Acto knife. And then we will feather those and let that sit off to the side for a few days. Not too bad. It's pretty nice, seamless, and it's going to be ready for us to build up all of our accessories on. What are we creating here? As you can see in the thumbnail, we are going to be sculpting dog bones and kibbles and bits. And there may be a little surprise here thrown in as we go through this process. So we're going to be using Sculpey Original for this entire process. I think I'll switch up my clay here soon. I've been using Sculpey Original to do so many demonstrations here over the last year or so. I think I'm going to start blending into Sculpey 3 and soufflés, and then I might blend into other clays here in the near future, just to show a lot of diversity here in my channel. So if you see some other clays popping up, that's the reason why. Got to mix things up a little bit sometimes. Now, the first time I create these little milk bones, these are the milk bones that me and the customer had already talked about. We want to create just the general shape here. Now, no, don't get me wrong. I do enjoy creating these freehand without a reference. And although I am looking at some milk bones as reference photos you saw there, they're just really, something's off about them. So along with these milk bones, we're also going to be sculpting out Kibbles and Bits dog food. Now, there's so many different reference photos that you could pull from like you Google and things like that, and different dog producing brands. But these are the ones that I wanted to produce in the upper left-hand corner. It's just a mixed assortment of different shapes and color combinations of general Kibbles and Bits. And I really didn't want to lock myself into anything particular, but I also wanted just to kind of reference the overall general idea of dog food in this project. And I really thought that going with a multi-color dog food would also give it a lot of vibrancy and a lot of depth. And to get a really good baked texture effect, we use this 3D printed raven and a little bit of sandpaper to do so. I also went out and bought a box of milk bones. Groot approves, my loving dog there. We're going to use these to get a better aspect ratio on these bones. I just felt like they were a little bit off when I freehanded them, and actually they're turning out a lot longer when I use them as a stamp. Now, just be aware, if you want to check out that video for these milk bone stamps, then you can definitely check that out. I made it its own individual sculpting video for the tips and tricks playlist. It was just making this video a little bit too long. We're going to give these bones a little bit of texture with our handy dandy raven there. Just do a little bit of cleanup work with a silicone tool, and then we can move on to the next stages of this project. Yes, that is baking fresh out of the oven. Cookies, yum, yum. Man alive, were those bad boys hot out of the oven. Had to give them a little bit to cool off, but what we're going to do is we're going to do a dry brush effect just to kind of showcase the overall stencil work or stamp work. And then I also sent this as a proof to my customer to see if they liked them before I actually went forward with the process. There's a reference in the upper left-hand corner, milk bones, love it. And then we're going to go ahead and begin building out the actual Kibbles and Bits base. Now, just remember that we sculpted this Kibbles and Bits also out of Sculpey Original, and we kind of made those in random shapes, and we're going to make sure that they're painted to perfection. So I'm going to clean up the outside edges just a little bit, kind of trim that back just a bit, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and start building up our base from here. So here's our milk bone here. Now we can put this on this little topper 1,000 different ways. And I actually just decided to just kind of make them overall facing two different directions. Now you can see I'm kind of holding them up off of that smoothed on base. And then that means we have to build up a little bit of a clay structure for those to kind of lean on into. So again, just remember that these milk bones are already baked to perfection. We'll be doing a double bake on them because the actual base of the topper is not baked yet, right? So just remember you're going to do a double bake here, but it also gives you a really good firm handhold on when you're ready to take this off of the actual acrylic lid to bake it. So just be aware that you're kind of giving yourself a handhold so that way you don't mush any of the clay that you sculpt to perfection on the actual item itself. So sometimes it's really good just to do a double bake on particular items, depending on if you want that kind of to lock into position. using a little bit of a flat bladed tool here, and we're going to go ahead and just kind of apply a lot of pressure, and we're going to mush in this base layer here before we start to add all of those kibbles and bits that we had sculpted previously. All right, so these are all different shapes here, and we're just going to start to kind of piece these in just like a puzzle. And you don't have to get full coverage, but you want to have a little bit of a contact between kibbles as we apply these. A little bit of a distance between them is not a problem or a big deal whatsoever. Again, this is supposed to look like it's built up kibbles in a pile with milk bones on top, and the paint job will take care of it from there. But we are going to use a little bit of a dental tool here just to give a little bit of texture and dimension and shape in between each of these little pieces of kibbles and bits. They almost look like rocks when they're all kind of bleached out like this, but just be aware what I'm trying to do is I'm trying not to have any kind of like voids of air between them. I really want that to be kind of like a singular piece, and then we're going to let the paint do the work for us. Now, as a surprise for the customer, I also wanted to create kind of a dog tag to go along with this topper. And at this point, I did not know what I wanted to write on it, but after talking to the customer, we kind of decided to put like BRK, like bark, get it, on the actual dog tag. Instead of using a big mold making kit, I decided to use a water-based bathroom silicone to do this. And I really want to try this for a while, and I made a video on it, and I have yet to decide if I'm going to release it just because it was kind of like a hit and miss on whether or not it worked. As you can see, I had a lot of pieces of this that just didn't dry, and I'm going to do a lot of experimentation with that in the future, maybe different brands, to see if I can really fine-tune that process. But as you can see here is a plaster casted from the mold. As you can see, it's very rough around the portion where you'd write the lettering on. But after using the Sculpey Original, this is what we have. I used a silicone tip tool to smooth that out, and it turned out pretty good overall. As you can see, again, we did make a plaster mold of that, and I also had made one out of resin as well, and it was very, very kind of rough around the edges. So using Sculpey Original, I was able to clean that up. We're going to go ahead and remove the topper from the actual tumbler now, and we're going to kind of set that off to the side. Slow-mo effect. Gotta love it. So we're going to go ahead and remove the plastic as well as the portion of the clay that was just a filler. Now remember, I'm using my left hand here because I have two of those bones that have already been pre-baked, so I can use those as a handhold and not smush the clay. Do a little bit of smoothing around the outside edges where it will be making contact with the lid. And we're going to bake this at 275 for around 20 to 30 minutes until it is cooled completely. As you can see here, we're test fitting it on the actual acrylic lid, and it's working out quite well in total. Now I'm using an X-Acto knife here. We're going to kind of mark out where the straw hole needs to be. Depending on the version of the kind of topper that I like to use. Sometimes I actually like to put an actual hole in the topper, but this time I decided to carve out a section where the straw would kind of fit in at an angle. And it gives the customer a lot more versatility as far as how they would like to position the straw that they have. In some circumstances, the customer may have to order a larger straw than the tumbler would normally come with. But as you can see at the very end of the video, the one that I have for the customer works out pretty good overall. So we're just going to slowly just carve this away. That's the great thing about Sculpey Original is that you can easily carve away with an X-Acto knife. And there's a really satisfying process with this, guys, just removing the clay. But just remember, what you remove, you can never put back unless you want to rebake. So just be very detailed and meticulous about what you'd like to remove. And I'm trying also not to remove too much of the portions of the kibble because I just don't want to remove any of those details. But as you can see, this works out quite well overall. Here's a little kind of straw just to kind of test the fit, and it works out quite well. Looking pretty good, you guys. Now, as you can see, I can slide the lid up, and it also fits into position without any kind of problem, and there is that large air gap that we had sculpted previously. Of course, when we did the pre-sculpt work, it took longer, but it's worth every minute that we spent on it because this is the finished form. It's just a lot better fit overall. All right, looking pretty good. So we're going to get ready to go ahead and drill our holes for our magnets here. Before we can do so, I need to give it a light sanding. This is just kind of smooth out any kind of imperfections and just upgrade the overall quality of the clay along the bottom portion. Now, if there are any pieces that are just kind of like too form fit to the acrylic topper, that would keep the epoxy from fitting between the clay and the acrylic topper, this would kind of fit that. So you can kind of sand that down just a little bit. Give yourself a little bit of an air barrier there. That way you have room for that epoxy later on in the process. looking pretty good overall, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out so far. So next portion here, we're going to go ahead and get ready to line up some holes for some magnets, and then we will go ahead and move on to next steps. So we're getting ready to go ahead and drill the magnet holes. Now, I'm not gonna lie, throughout this process, I was originally gonna use the original magnets that I had, and I just felt like they just weren't strong enough. I've used them for a very long time, and they've been pretty good overall. There's these like kind of like charcoal style, very soft magnets. And I just felt like upgrading. It was finally time for me just to use a different type of magnet. So I actually ordered specific magnets. I had to wait for them to come in. And in doing so, I originally put one magnet in. And you can see it's going to create a really nice form fit effect. But I changed things up here in just a few moments. And I actually used a higher strength silver magnet, and it's just a little bit different. The ports that I had originally drilled just didn't fit out very well, but in the long run, after everything's epoxied and kind of locked into position, it will look absolutely phenomenal. So what we're going to do here is now we're going to begin the painting process. Now this actually was dedicated in its own individual video in 6x speed. We're really going to chop this up a little bit and start moving into the second part of this video at a higher rate of speed. So just be aware though that if you want to see this painting in a little bit slower time lapse, just more relaxing, then that's available to you on my YouTube channel as well. I will release that a day or so after this video. That way you can enjoy that at your leisure as well. I will describe more about the painting process when I release that video, but just be aware that we're going to go ahead and roll into some brown, some burnt umber, some raw umber, and then we'll kind of build up into a higher level of dry brushing, introducing more titanium whites and some raw sienna into these layers before we start to introduce more of the kind of kibbles and bits, red, green, and yellow ochre. I use a lot of yellow ochre throughout this process, so just be aware that you're going to see a lot of that kind of pop in here throughout this process. And I decided to go with a kind of a reddish tinge and a brown tinge milk bone before we go into painting the actual dog tag itself in silvers and a kind of a blue patina. So go ahead and sit back and enjoy as we kind of paint this out, and then we'll see you back in a few seconds in the next step. Now, as we roll into the final segments of this portion of the painting video, we're going to go ahead and start with a kind of a wash. Now, this is a water and Dollar & Rowney acrylic ink wash. If I remember correctly, this is a burnt umber acrylic wash. Now, this is just going to kind of fill in any kind of voids that don't have color, but there aren't really many of those voids that don't have color. But if there are, it would fill them in. But more so, it's going to kind of blend in those outside edges of the kibbles and bits, and it's going to kind of blend some of those kind of blended portions of burgundy, green, and yellow ochre into each other, and it's going to make it look more like a deep pile of dog food. Now, of course, I will use a little bit of dry brushing up over those edges of the kibbles and bits just to give them a little bit of a highlight here and there before we go into the epoxy layers. As we roll here into the actual dog tag, we're going to be working with 3 colors to begin with. All of these are folk art craft paints. This is a kind of a midnight blue, kind of like a pale blue, and then also a sterling silver. That sterling silver is really reserved from the outside edges of the actual dog tag. And we will also be doing a wash over this to kind of bring some of those little details around the outside edges of the dog tag to life. You'll see that in just a moment. It'll go pow, and you'll see all of those details come forward quite a bit. So here we are using a little bit of patina here, and I'm just going to use that to go along the outside edges just slightly, just a very minuscule amount. And then we will use the same acrylic wash from before, hitting it with a heat gun while also spraying it with the diluted water. And then here you can see all those little fine details that came from the mold popping out. Look really good with the acrylic wash over them, and it kind of just deepens them just a little bit, so they're just more visible. That's going to especially help when we go over it with epoxy, and it kind of blends those out just a little bit because it won't have that full texture that you would see when you kind of look at it with light layering down on it. Looking pretty good, right? Not too bad. Now again, that's the silicone mold, and then this is the finished dog tag. Looking pretty good. Now, as you can see, I did make a slot for that in the sculpting process, so you can see it's going to fit down in there just like that, and it's going to kind of lean up against the existing bones. I do believe that dogs everywhere would approve of this 3D topper. It'd probably make them drool a little bit. Now, as you can see, these are really painted out great, and I'll have a little bit of fine tuning to do here and there along the process into completion. So this is a multi-layer of epoxy here. I did decide to do a 2-part epoxy, and to do this, we're going to be using Flynn's Sister regular set. If I had some fast set on hand, I would use that, but I don't have any on hand right now. And I just felt like using some 2 set because honestly, I didn't have any UV resin on hand at the moment either. So I just used what I had. It just meant that I had to spend an extra few days just working on it, which is not a problem whatsoever. When you're just taking your time, enjoying the creation process, what's an extra few days when it's giving you a great result for an item? So what we'll do here is we're just kind of like centering these holes where the magnets are going to be set into. Now just remember, I've already filled in one of those with a magnet previously, so that's why they're kind of snapping into position, because they're attracting to the magnet that's already in place. So just be aware that the magnets themselves will center themselves as they see fit, but I kind of want them to lean towards the back of the topper. So it would be the back from where it's facing us. So I'm gonna put a little bit of epoxy mainly around the outside edges of the sharp edges of the holes for the magnets. And then we'll work this around the outside edges of the bottom of the topper here. So just don't worry about it too much, but you don't want this to truly flow over the outside edges and around to the bottom of the topper, or the bottom how we're looking at it. It's actually the top of the topper, so we're working from bottom to top, right? Kind of confusing, I know. But we don't want that to drip too much. A little bit of cascading down over the sides is okay because we have not yet epoxied the top of the topper. We will do that in just a moment here. But I just don't want it to be where it's not... I don't want it to be where there's too many drips to where I have to do extreme sanding to get the effect that we need. Naturally, when you're doing multiple layers of epoxy like this at different angles, because do not forget we also have the dog tag to do in a little bit as well. Here we are putting those magnets into place. And what I did is I actually applied 2 of those. So there's 2 magnets on top of each other, but between them is a piece of plastic wrap. You can kind of see that in the picture there. And when I let this dry, and tomorrow I would go ahead and remove the magnets as well as the plastic wrap, and it gives us a nice clean surface. We'll do another layer of epoxy later on, and I actually apply a little bit of gunmetal gray metallic to that, and it just gives a really cool effect to the bottom of the topper. It really wasn't necessary, but I just found it really cool and satisfying to kind of dress that up a little bit. Now these magnets are substantially stronger than the ones I was using before, and I was so glad that I shifted into a different direction when I was working with this. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually epoxy the top of the topper here. Now this is a very satisfying process. Now one thing that I noticed for some reason, and I don't know why, maybe it's because of the paintbrush I was using. I've used this paintbrush with a bunch of paints and things in the past. I got a lot of bubbles. So like you'll see like little white edges puddling in the kind of kibble there. And I just wasn't digging that. So I had to babysit this for at least 30 or 40 minutes to make sure that those little white puddles did not remain. That really doesn't affect you here watching the video, but I'd like to state when I make mistakes or something just weird happens. That way if you do run into something similar, so you see the white puddling there around some of those kibbles. It could be because my paintbrush is adding too much oxygen to the epoxy, possibly. And some of those did pop when I hit it with a heat gun. However, some of them did not want to pop naturally. And I'm not willing to risk working overnight with this and then next morning everything can be peeled out like it has a layer of white liquid over them. So as you can see, I'm working with it continuously. I'm going to kind of remove some of those puddles from the inside edges of the kibbles, and we're just going to make sure that we get a nice crystal-like effect. Now I will also here in a minute drop the dog tag into position. That way it can go ahead and begin welding itself into that little hole that I had sculpted in. So we'll go ahead and get that into position, get it in the correct angle so it's making 2 points of upper contact with it, and I'll apply a little bit of epoxy to kind of lock that in. Just remember we're not epoxying the outside edge of that because I'm going to do some letter writing on it, BRK for Bart, before we kind of epoxy that for final looks. But that's here nor there. A little bit of writing is nothing. I just use a little bit of an acrylic marker to do that, but it turned out really, really great overall. Here's where we're going to kind of see a little bit of a final effect of this before we roll into the final glamour shots. Just remember, look at this beautiful epoxy swirl over a hydro dip. I'm so happy with how that turned out, and you can also check out that video as well. Whoa, what an amazing project, you guys. Now, if you haven't had the opportunity to see the first video in this little project series, make sure you go back and do so. It is under the hydro dipping playlist. As you can see, we created a beautiful blue hydro dip, also an epoxy swirl around the bottom, as well as the vinyl decals for Black Rock Dog Training is the business name that they were wanting on the tumbler itself. Along with this, of course, we actually have the acrylic topper itself with the 2 magnets already epoxied in place. I also am going to send her 2 already previously wrapped acrylic straws, and of course the topper will fit on like that, the lid. And then the actual topper itself is here, right here. So we'll go ahead and zoom in and show you what all these look like together. But as you can see, the magnets just snap right into place. Snap right into place right there. Now, of course, it has room for the straws to be moved around a little bit, up and down. And she can get a longer straw if she chooses to. And I also sent her a lid without the magnets on it as well, in case she wants to drink out of this just like normal. And again, the topper is on there, so if she's driving down the road, she doesn't really have to worry about that coming off at all. And that's the most important thing when you make a topper like this. Depending on how heavy it is, you want it not to come off of the actual lid itself. So I really do hope you guys enjoyed this overall process video. It has been an absolute blast of a commission to create, and I'm so excited to get this mailed out to her. Again, she is an amazing customer, and I'm glad that she came back to me and wanted a piece of art from my studio. Hopefully we have something else coming out for her in the next few months to half a year, depending on how big that project is. I know this one took me a little bit longer than normal to get it out to her, but it was so worth the process to get this thing sculpted and painted out. Again, guys, I really do appreciate you here on YouTube. Make sure you stick around my YouTube channel and watch some of my other videos. They're all binge-worthy, or at least I believe they are. I have everything from acrylic paintings to oils to pastels to colored pencils to sculptures to clay to tumblers to dioramas. If you want a piece of art, or if you're interested in purchasing something, make sure you reach out to me through my Etsy shop. Otherwise, guys, I hope to see you guys on the next awesome project. Later, guys.